my name is Michel Haring. I'm a plant physiologist, a plant geneticist. I do research in plants at the University of Amsterdam. My interest is mainly to see how plants respond to the environment, how they react on pathogens, on heat, stress, and all the things that a plant needs to communicate with. So my knowledge is of plants, and I got to know the people in organic agriculture when the GMOs were first introduced in Europe. So this is 1994. The first field trials were done in Germany, and then I got to know the organic organization there, or mainly Demeter, who was interested in genetically modified organisms, in GMOs, because they thought that this is not a good idea, but they did not really know what it was. So they contacted me. I was working in Freiburg in Germany at that time. So my aim was to tell them what the technique is about. What is genetic modification? How does it work? So I got to know them as an organization that wanted to know how science works. And over the past years, I have spent time with them explaining how genetic modification works, but also how modern plant breeding works, because modern plant breeding is completely different from breeding that is that they are used to in organic breeding. So my connection with organic farmers mostly was to explain what technology is about, but also explain the kind of research that I'm doing. Why am I so interested in plants?
So you said there is a difference between the modern plant breeding, what you call the modern plant breeding, and the way they're used to in organic. What do you mean by that?
Well, the difference between organic plant breeding, or let's say traditional plant breeding, and modern plant breeding is mostly the use of technology. And most of it is laboratory technology. And then again, most of it is about DNA, knowing the DNA of every plant species, knowing the complete DNA of a plant species, and to try and understand how the DNA, the genes, connect to traits. And this is what modern plant breeding does. It tries to find out which part of the DNA you need, and then focus on the DNA as a pre-breeding step. So the first decisions in breeding are made based on DNA. In traditional breeding, you look at different species on the field, you look how they perform, and then you try to figure out which ones would I like to combine. So that is looking at the whole plant, looking in the field, and then combining them. And the modern plant breeding does do that at the end. So they're breeders, so they do want to look at the plant. But there's a lot of technology in that allows them to do the first selection with regard to certain traits. So that is on the way of breeding, that is a big difference. Modern plant breeding means that you select first at the DNA level, and then from the 100,000 options you have, you narrow it down to 100, and these you will do traditional breeding with. Because you need breeding means you need seed. So that is what modern breeding is about, that you try to use all the knowledge that is available at the level of genes, and then select the plants that fit your idea of genes that have to be present. And you still realize that there's more than that, and these you will put in the field and ask, well, how will they perform? But there's a lot of technology in the first step. And the organic breeding means you put the plants in the field, in your system, and you look which ones do behave to the situation you are working with. And if there is a disease, you look which ones are coping best. And then you try to do breeding again to find the most important combination. And the difference there, as far as I've seen it, is that organic breeding looks at the plant and tries to figure out what works best in the situation on the field. While in modern plant breeding, you first look at the DNA, at the genes, what is there, and then you look at how it works on the field. So that's a different approach. And maybe the most important part is that the organic breeding that I have seen is not aiming to own the races that are being produced. So this is an economic fact. Organic breeders generally do things in a cooperation, so together they own the races that they produce. A breeding company sells seeds, so the aim is to own these seeds and to make money there. So they have a completely different aim, and they also have different products.
Can you describe the difference between the traditional and the new genomic techniques?
Yeah, traditional GMO, traditional genetic modification, means you put in a gene into a plant. And a gene could be a gene from, a bacterium, from a jellyfish, or from a tomato plant into a tomato. That is what you do. You put an extra gene in. And this gene will give it a new quality. So we know, for instance, the resistance against herbicides. You can put that in any plant species by putting in a bacterial gene into this plant. And this is a genetically modified organism. The new genomic techniques will change something in the plant itself. So the tomato plant is being treated with these new genomic technique, and you change a tomato gene into a new variety of that gene that will give it a different quality. So the idea with the new genomic techniques is that you stay within the gene pool of the tomato and you change that. So in essence, it stays the same. You've only changed a few building blocks, a few pieces of DNA. And that is why it's called a new genomic technique. Well, organic breeding does not use genetic modification at all.
At all.
At all. They are not interested in this single gene approach or in a Lego approach, so building block approach, where you take, I need 100 genes and then I have the optimal tomato. They are interested in the whole picture of the plant. So how does your plant perform in your situation, in your soil, in your farm system? And that is how they look at the plant. So they do not take it apart into DNA units. They look at the plant. So organic breeding does not use these kind of technologies. It always looks as a whole. So it takes the plant in the system and it looks, does it perform well? And if it does not, what kind of variety would I need to have a better performance? Or even, what kind of farm practice do I need to change to make it perform better? So it's a different approach than the modern or the industrial breeding, where you try to breed one species that will fit everywhere. So it's very expensive to do all these DNA techniques and to characterize your gene pool. That's very expensive, so they want to have one top tomato or maybe 10 top tomato lines that they can sell, and not 100. So this is also a difference, that you will have a uniform tomato that will do the same in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, in America, in Ecuador. So this is why they are focusing on a single plant for whole world. Organic breeding looks for the situation where the plant will grow. So will it perform differently there? Then they need to select in that environment.
And to cancel this effect of the environment, they have to rely on chemistry, on pesticides, on synthetic pesticides, right?
Yeah. So the modern breeding, so to speak, the industrial breeding, takes into account that a plant will receive, if you go to the field, the plant will receive fertilizer, NPK, as they say, the fertilizer. It will receive pest control. It will receive herbicide control. So this is the standard. So this is how they do their selection. Organic breeding does not use pesticides, so they have farm practices that make their plants work. So they have no chemistry, but they will maybe physically remove the weeds. So they go one extra time across the field to remove the weeds. So that is a practice. So your plants need to be able to handle that. So that is a big difference. If you have the industrial way of working, a big monoculture, then you will have to have all these chemical treatments to get the yield that is promised. So I think the industrial part is also 99% yield and then quality. And for the organic breeding, it is yield, of course, but maybe the quality is more important, but most importantly, it has to fit in the agricultural system.
Let's get on the second theme, which is can you describe us the principle, the general principle of plant protection without synthetic pesticides, and what is the role of seed breeding inside building this plant protection, and also I've preparing the interview, I went through the notions of crop resistance and crop resilience, and I think it can be interesting to discuss it a little bit.
So the difference between organic breeding, organic agriculture and industrial agriculture is the use of pesticides. One of the big things is different, but also the attention to the soil is big difference. The industrial part, the soil is just a matrix where you put in the fertilizer and then you put in the seeds. In organic agriculture, the soil determines how your plant performs. So the soil is already a big difference. And then the choice that is made in industrial is that you will have chemistry for every step. So the seeds are already being coated with chemistry to have protection for the first few weeks. Then you will have herbicides, chemistry to remove the weeds. And then you will have chemistry to kill the insects because, you have a monoculture. So you have miles and miles or kilometers and kilometers of plants of the same species. You will have pest problems. The pest problem will get bigger as long as the temperature rises, because that is what insects like. So you will have to do that in the end several times. So this is industrial. The organic breeding, or the organic farming mostly, the whole system has to be to prevent that this happens. So in a sense, your farm practice should not be that you have miles and miles of the same, but also have intercropping or crops next to each other that will help them to be more resilient, or even to have bushes or trees somewhere to allow insects, but also the enemies of the insects, to be around. So you try to have a more balanced situation from the natural and not from the chemical part. So you work with your farm practices and you try to work like that. So it means that sometimes you have to do more manual labor or you have to do more physical labor than you would do in the chemical industry, where you just know at day 25 I have to spray this, at day 36 I have to spray that. Here in the organic agriculture you have to look, well, when do I have to change that? And then if we go back to breeding, the species that you use or the variety that you use has to be able to cope with it. So the industrial part, it just needs to have yield and homogeneity. This is all it needs. And the rest you will protect with chemistry. In organic agriculture, the plant needs to be able to handle more differences. Temperature, drought, but also microbes and insects. And part of that is because of the fact that it interacts with the soil. The soil is healthier, is different. And we know now, since maybe 10, 20 years, that the soil can be a big difference independent of the genetics of the plant. So yes, the genetics of the plant is important to have a certain quality. But if you have a good soil, you will be able to support the plant to make it more resilient, not only resistant, to handle all these stresses that a plant will have in the field. So the abiotic stresses, temperature, drought, salinity, and the biotic stresses. And for the industrial agriculture, you try to solve that with chemistry. And so that is a big difference. And there the genetics is aimed at yield and homogeneity only. Organic agriculture looks at the whole plant, at the resilience, but also can it handle the soil? Can it talk to the soil? Can it become more resilient? And that is a big difference between the two kinds of breeding. If you look at the interaction with the soil, or just look at the plant as an optimal, well, almost fabric. It has to make something, and that's all. The rest you will support with chemistry.
What's the difference between resistance and resilience?
Well, resistance and resilience, they overlap. And I think traditionally resistance has been named a black and white situation. So you have a pathogen, and the pathogen is there and you will get sick. Or you will not get sick as a plant and you will be resistant. And many of the cases, we found out that this is determined by a single gene. So resistance is determined by a single gene and it's easy to breed. Resilience means that maybe you have these resistance genes, but there's other traits that you have that allow you to cope with different situations. Sometimes the resistance gene does not work anymore at higher temperatures. So you do have the gene, but you don't have the genetic makeup to cope with higher temperature. So resilience is more than just one pathogen, one resistance. It means that you can cope with many different things on a different level. And for me, resilience also means that you allow the plant to spend energy on being healthy instead of spending energy only on yield. So that is a big difference between resistance, where you aim for yield, and resilience, where you aim for plant health in combination with yield. Well, I think that that resilience is a very complex trait, as we call it. So being resilient is not something that you can easily determine in building blocks, because there's many ways that you can be resilient. So that makes it also interesting from the organic perspective, because not all plants need to be the same to all have a certain resilience. So you already have diversity in your crop because your resilience is differently put together. Resistance, as it is now, is mostly based on one biological action. You can kill the pathogen, or you can keep the insect away. So that's a single thing, and you will understand if it's a single thing, then the pathogen will find a way around it. The insect will learn and get away. So these are one-stop solutions that will only last a few years. And for the breeders, for the industrial breeders, this is a great thing, because they can develop new ones and sell you new seeds. The organic agriculture doesn't want that to happen, so it tries to have this resilience and to have the diversity and to also have an economic system where it does not rely on selling the seeds and making money, but to improve the crop for the whole community.
It's like the resilience of the insects or the resilience of the pathogen will be able to beat the resistance of the plant, and vice versa in the end.
I think that, remember that all our crops have been domesticated. We are responsible for them. Insects and pathogens do not have any boundaries. They can do whatever they like. So yes, if you challenge them, they will find a solution. If you have miles and miles of the same crop, this is easy pickings. You will have billions and billions and billions of pathogens, of insects. They are all challenged. There will be one that finds a solution, and then it's over. So biology says resistance is a temporary solution. Resilience is something that is difficult to understand, but will be closer to a more durable solution.
So we've talked around the technical aspects of seed breeding, but you told us that there is also difference in the economic model, and also the form of partnerships in development. So what about this?
Yeah, I think that if you are a breeding company and you're selling seeds, and this is what we as Dutch people, but I think all over the world, starting to do about more than 100 years ago, we started to have companies that were producing seeds, selling seeds. Before that, it was something that was done in a community, and you were exchanging seeds and nobody owned it, but you also try to improve it yourself. And in, let's say 100 or a little bit more years ago, people started to see a business model in it. And then the seeds became a product owned by a company that would give you the seeds and you would only have to sow them. So that is, the history is more than 100 years. And that has become a big business in such a way that every company also needs to protect their findings. If it takes 5 or 10 years to develop a new variety, this costs a lot of money. So you don't want it to get lost, or you don't want somebody to take your seeds and to grow seeds of their own. They have to come back to you. So one of the most important differences between industrial breeding, breeding for seeds for money, and organic breeding, which means that you will have seeds for the community to perform best, is that one is money aimed and the other is community aimed. And there's nothing wrong, but there's a different drive there. If you have an industry that wants to sell seeds, they want to own it, so the industry will produce seeds that are very difficult to reproduce. And this is called these F1 hybrid seeds. These seeds are, you can grow the plants and you have really good uniformity and yield. But if you take the seeds from these plants, you will not get the same product. So you have to come back every year to buy new seeds. If you want the same uniformity and the same yield, you cannot grow the seeds anymore yourself. And this is a great protection mechanism. And this is why all the breeding in industry is aimed at the so-called F1 hybrids. And F1 hybrid means that you develop two parents that are excellent and you combine them to be even more excellent, but genetically they are not stable. They will segregate again in the next generation. You will lose them. So for them that's a great model. For organic agriculture, you would like to have a system, an open pollination as they call it, where you will just grow the plants in the field, you will harvest the seeds and grow them again. And while you're doing that, you will select the better ones. But the ownership is the community and not a seed company. So that these are two completely different aims.
And which system is the most efficient when it comes to human society's resilience? Because when we are talking, there's a lot of talking about food security these days. So what's your opinion about that?
Well, I already expressed that if you're a seed company, if you're selling seeds, the only aim is to sell seeds. And if you do that well, people will buy your seeds. So you own the food, because they will only take your seeds. And most of the companies, I think, have the aim to produce great seeds, great plants. Most of them. If they do not, if they have different aims, for instance, if it's a chemical company that aims to sell both the seeds and the pesticides and the herbicides, then the aim is different from what society would like. Society would like, I think, to have a crop that does not need these chemicals, because they will get into the soil, into the water. You don't want that. So if the aim of the seed company is to sell great seed and to sell great plants, I think you're safe. This is what has happened the past 100 years. The past 20 years, large chemical industry has taken over these seed breeding companies with the aim to sell more chemicals. And that is where I think that the society is not happy. Because then the aim of the plant is not to have great plants, to have resilient plants, to have plants that do not rely on chemistry, but it's just that they want to have plants that do rely on chemistry because they want to sell the chemistry. And that is it's a big difference with regard to what society would like.
But one could argue that organic companies also want to make money. You know, there are companies as well.
Yeah, but making money is nothing wrong if it fits the needs of society. And if the needs of society are to have more resilient crops, to have more organic farming, then still you can make money. There's no problem there. The problem arises when the making money is only aimed at things that are not beneficial for society. And in the case of industry, it's moving towards being only useful to sell chemicals. The largest companies in the world that do seed breeding for the bulk crops, for rice, for cereals, for potatoes, for maize, and so on, these are chemical industry. And they are not interested in selling seeds that are independent of chemical input. They want to sell the fertilizer, they want to sell the pesticides, they want to sell the herbicides. That comes first.
And so is it possible for, how does organic, so I understand that you sort of, I wouldn't say you advocate, but you know, that you believe in a system where seed breeding is an activity autonomous in itself economically, that do not have to pair with other activities like chemical production, because it sort of twists the aims of seed breeding. But then how, if there is a company with only seed breeding, doing only that, how does it, and organic seed breeding where the seeds can reproduce, how does it pay itself? And do you have example of companies that manage to do that?
Yeah, well, of course, if there are people working on it, there has to be some kind of system to pay this. This can be commercially, but it can also be that you have a community that takes part in the breeding and that brings the money, or even has money coming in to support the breeders. So that is the participatory part. So let's do it again. This is the participatory part, where all the farmers also participate in the breeding and also contribute to the breeding. So in that sense, all the farmers and even all community or all society participates in producing these seeds. But still there can be a company that is responsible, because you have to have responsibility. So yes, money can be made, but we have to realize that we have to pay that. And so we have to pay the breeders. And we've done that always, only they had different names. These were monks. They were somewhere in society. They were, so it is part of it. And this has been taken out because of the industrial breeding and has become, let's say, a capitalistic way of looking at it. And I think that what has changed enormously the past 20 years is the involvement of the chemical industry. If this is not the case, but if you aim for great varieties, then I think you can still make it either a commercial activity or a participatory activity. Both can be possible. And the only thing is that there has to be, for the commercial part, there has to be enough consumers, so people that buy the seeds, to be able to keep it up. But they have shifted towards the chemical industry so much that it's very difficult to take a very big company now and say you have to do all this for organic, because then you have to leave all these technologies that you have to leave them out. So I think that both of them will exist, but I think that the link to chemistry is the biggest challenge for agriculture in the future. If you want to lose that, you have to go back again to the soil. What I see now in research is that people are realizing that the soil is probably the most important part for a plant. And not because of the fact that it's the soil, it contains all kinds of nutrients. No, it contains all kinds of microbes. And these will stimulate or inhibit the plant, or at least they will communicate with the plant and make the plant work better. So that is what research is now showing. So if that is the case, then there may be a shift from also the commercial companies towards trying to use this interaction as a new selling point. So my seeds will be better for that soil. But that is an enormous shift that the big companies have to make.
Yeah, it's like we need to invent new forms, because you told that before the capitalist system, the concentration, it was monks, you said, but monks, we cannot really go back to monks.
No, but the monks were the people that were able to spend their time on it.
Yeah.
And now we would have to find the people that want to spend their time there and pay them. And the only thing is, how much do you want to pay them, or do you want to make a big money on it? Because the big seed industries now are making huge profits, which is good. But if you go to organic agriculture, there's a lot more people involved in doing the work on the field. So that's a different kind of people. The commercial, or let's say the industrial breeding, there's a lot of laboratory work. So there's a lot of scientists. So that means an enormous shift. And I think that both are possible. I think that also industrial breeding should be able to provide seeds that can do without the chemicals, but then they should invest in that. And I know in the Netherlands there are several initiatives where they try to figure out how can I get a better connection to the soil, and how does diversity, genetic diversity, help in getting that solution. So yes, there also in commercial breeding, the notion is that something needs to change to get away from these chemical things.
So you've mentioned a little bit I've called that the field and field. So like a research field in the laboratory, and what you're doing here in those greenhouses, and the connection with the farmers, the people on the field, but the crop field.
Yeah.
So how does it work, generally speaking, and do you have example of collaboration to develop new varieties? And again, how does conventional and organic farming differentiate here?
Yeah, I think that, well, we're here in a greenhouse, and you can see the tomatoes here, they're nice in pots, so it's all, this is research, not production, but production also takes place in a controlled environment. If we talk about tomato, if we would go to the field and you do field research, that is a completely different field, which is nice. But we try to reduce the complexity by growing things in pots or in other environments. So research tries to reduce the complexity to be able to understand mechanisms. But that is, of course, completely beyond the real situation, because you do not reduce complexity there. So if you are a farmer, you will not be able to reduce the complexity. You will only increase complexity, because you have a certain kind of soil, you have worked on this soil, there's organic matter in it, there's bacteria in it, it's dry, it's wet, it's clay, it's sand, it's peat, it's everything, and this is where you have to work with. And then this year you have a very wet season and you have a very dry season, so the field work means that everything that we try to do separately, and we try to keep everything the same and then change the temperature. Everything the same and then try to change the humidity. Everything the same and then we put a pathogen on it. So that is all reductionism. You try to reduce it to a simple system. So everything we find is a part of the complex system. If you go into the system, you will get everything at the same time. And you will get these extremes as well as the normal situation. So if you do breeding in that situation, so you go into the field, you make life very difficult. But you also will find products that will have solutions you have not thought about. And then we come again at the naming of resistance or resilience. We do not understand resilience because it has so many faces. There are so many solutions to a problem. And you will find, if you do selection in the field, and you do that properly, and you have enough genetic diversity, you will be able to find new varieties that you have never dreamed of, because you didn't know that they existed. If you do breeding aimed at the knowledge of your DNA, you will stick to that. You will work on that. And still you will have good solutions, because there's so much knowledge. but your knowledge is from a reductionist approach. It's from a tomato plant in a pot or from a petri dish. And that is, research is different from the real life. So if industrial breeding takes research as the starting point and then try to put everything together, it needs all these technologies to get there. If you're an organic breeder, you need to have diversity. And that is the biggest challenge. Where does my diversity come from? Genetic diversity, soil diversity, and then see what happens if you grow your plant species. And it's different for every plant species. I'm talking about tomatoes, but for a cabbage it's different. For wheat it's different. So you need to have this diversity and you need to have the knowledge how to select and how to build on it. And one of the things that you always hear is that, organic agriculture will never give the same yields as the industrial. That is true. It's as true as it is, because the industrial will have the chemicals to support it. And still, you can have, if you would take away all this chemistry, you will be able to have a yield that is sufficient for what we need for the food security that we're looking for. It's a different system, and it may cost more to be able to do field practices that are needed in organic agriculture. So it's a balance. Use chemistry, use people and knowledge.
Mm. And how does the interaction eventually you may have or other researcher may have with people in the field nourishes your research?
Yeah, well, I think that for me the interaction with organic agriculture means that they show me how complex real life is. That if they work with a certain set of varieties, how different this can be in one situation or in another situation. If you grow them in a dry environment, if you grow them in clay, in sand or anything, if you look at how these organic breeders and farmers work and what the results are, you do understand as a biologist that there is much more. And I was talking about 1994, so I've been talking a lot to them for a long period. They were already convinced that the soil was important at that time, or even 50 years or 100 years ago. They were convinced that the soil is important. Only the last 20 years it's become an issue in plant research. What kind of soil? If you look at the pots here, it's all peat. We try to make it as inert as possible. So also reduce the complexity. In the real soil, there's microbes, thousands of microbes. We don't know what they do, what combination works best, and what combination will change for the benefit or for worse. So they have been working for years on that organic agriculture because the soil is important for them. So this is what I learned, is that they already had knowledge that we are just acquiring. The difficulty is that if you want to do selection in the field, it's much more labor intensive. So that needs to be done. And you need to educate people what to look for. And again, you need to generate diversity to have a choice of differences. So that is what breeding is about. And that you need to organize.
How do you do that?
Well, you can organize that like, some initiatives like in Germany, the Saatgut Bingenheim, they have organized it. In 1994 they started by collecting as many different varieties as possible. And having collected these varieties, trying them in different situations all through Germany, Austria, Switzerland, to find out which of these varieties are most resilient or are most promising, and then to try again and to involve the farmers in the selection process and also in the production of seeds. So they were building every year on the knowledge to create new crops and to respond to changes. Breeding is a very slow process, so they've been on this for 30 years, and it means that maybe they have improved the steps of improvement have been 5 or 6 times now. So that is very small. But it is a way to involve everybody. It's also a way to have, let's say, an economical system, because you have a community that does the breeding. So with them I have collaborated a lot, and I've learned about how do you try to get to this diversity. Do you need this diversity, or is the agricultural practice more important than the genetic diversity? So for me they have been a constant challenge for my idea of I need this gene and I need this gene and then it will work. They will challenge me and ask me like, okay, but if you look at the environment, this may be more important. And that is the case if you look at farming. The environment is maybe more important than the genetics. So that is what I learned from these initiatives, that it takes time, it takes also organization, and it takes people that know what they're talking about. It's not something that you can do as a side thing. You need breeders, so you need to finance them, and they have a system to do that.
It really feels like, in fact, it's not really an investment result and stable situation process, but rather a constant, continuous, proportional improvement. Because once you've managed to breed, let's say, a variety that has, after a process that you said takes years, then you have this variety that has the resistance and resilience you are looking for. But then the environment evolves. And we know that we're going through big changes in the upcoming century in the environment, dramatic ones, and so it really feels like it's a constant battle in the end.
Yeah, well, this is what let's say the press or the communicators try to call it, a battle, but this is life. You have to look for the balance. So I'm not calling it a battle, because that means that you're not, this is the real life. So if you would I don't call my life a battle. I call it a challenge. And you need to know the challenges to be able to handle it. And you need to be able to put your risk in such a way that every year you will be able to get to this balance. And you will be able also to take into account that some things went wrong. And yes, the climate change is going very rapid. And climate change means that your crop has to be able to cope more with different temperatures, with drought or with flooding. So it's a difference. But there are varieties that are able to do that. This will always have a cost. If a plant has to spend more energy on coping with external factors, it will have less yield. So you have to be able to say, okay, I'll take this less yield. Or I will organize it in such a way that I will have other things that will give yield and balance it. So yes, it's not something that you can do and sit by and say, okay, next year I'll do the same. And industrial farmers would like to do that. They will do, okay, I will do sugar beets this year, 50, 100 acres. And I'll do the same next year. Oh, and then I'll do potatoes. And I can just look it up, and this is what I do. So then it's like going to an office and just filling in your forms, and that's it. But agriculture, as it is more complex if you don't take the chemistry, and it will change rapidly. Not only temperature and other things, but also insects will come in, diseases will come in, because temperatures change. If it's a lot of humidity, you will get more molds and fungi. If it's a lot of drought, you will get more insects. So you have to realize that agriculture, if you don't want to have the chemistry, it takes more from the person or from the community to manage it.
And which model, in your opinion, gives the best response in a rapidly changing environment, chemistry-based or organic?
I think that let's say the technological breeding can also give solutions, because here it's also about finding diversity, finding solutions, and maybe that can go faster, but it depends on the solution that you need. So I'm not saying throw away this modern plant breeding, but it's more like, okay, if you can do that without the chemistry and get the solutions, I would say that that's a good direction. But I don't think you should throw it away, because they produce a lot of interesting products. And I think that there should be a way of combining these two areas. If organic agriculture is not able to find enough diversity to solve the problems, because that is what I observe. How does organic agriculture, how can it produce enough diversity, spontaneous, from wild species, from crosses, how can it generate enough diversity to ask the question, please, come up with a more resilient variety? So that is the biggest challenge for our organic agriculture. The industrial agriculture has tools to look at genes and to combine and to do technological changes, technological diversity. So they may have an edge there, they may be faster there, but still they need to test it in the field. And if you, as organic agriculture, say, well, I don't want to have these genetic modification techniques, I agree. But then you should still be able to come up with a solution for where does your diversity come from?
I mean, it's with always this sort of chemistry, putting the objective of putting chemistry out of the equation somehow, or not.
I think you have to put chemistry out of the equation. Yeah, you have to. I think that the European Committee has agreed upon that. I remember that they already agreed in 2015 that by 2025, which is this year, they would rule out major pesticides. Times change, and people that are now determining what is happening have said, okay, we'll postpone that to 2030 or postpone that to 2035. So the chemistry will still be there. Although I know that the plant breeders have focused on solutions that do not need chemistry. So yes, they have solutions, but will they become commercially viable only when we take away the chemistry? So yes, there is a decision to be made to say we don't want that chemistry anymore. And then traditional breeding, or let's say more modern plant breeding will have solutions, and organic plant breeding will have solutions. So it's not either or, but both of them will have a solution. So for me, the only thing that I advocate is to do away with the chemistry, especially the fertilizer, because that is really damaging. It costs a lot of energy. We're wasting the planet. You have to have phosphate from somewhere. In 50 years, we will not have any phosphate available anymore. What will happen is that they will try to mine the sea, because it all came down at the bottom of the sea. So they will start ruining the sea as well. I don't want that. I think that if you take away that chemistry part, you will be able to have enough yield to feed the world, and you will have to make choices. But this is what I am prepared to do. And those who do not want to change their way of living, they will advocate this chemistry because it means that you don't have to change.
So let's talk a bit about your own research,
yeah,
and how you build, how you use smell and volatiles of tomatoes to build tomato protection, I suppose. So
well, I'm a researcher, so I'm interested in what can a plant do to be resilient or to cope with its environment. And in my group, we have focused on the fact that plants produce a lot of volatiles or smells. There's a lot of plants doing that. You're familiar with flowers that produce scents. You buy a rose and sometimes it smells. And it smells because it attracts insects for its pollination. We work on tomato because tomato also produce smells, but this is to communicate with insects that are either devastating or that are helping them to kill other insects. So they produce scents to keep insects away that would normally suck their sap, to repel them, to kill them, but also to attract the enemies of these insects to kill these, so that the plant will finally have a balance. So it will be communicated with its environment. So it has to be able to produce these scents. Then it has to recognize the insects, because if it's a small spider mite, which is not an insect, but if it's a small spider mite or a whitefly or even a beetle, these are all different and they need different solutions. So the plant needs to recognize them. How do you recognize whether there is a beetle chewing on your leaf or whether it's an aphid, a small insect sucking on your leaf? How do you recognize them? A plant can do that. So we've been trying to investigate that. We've been looking at how does an insect eat from a plant. Most insects are very dirty eaters, so they chew on a plant, but they also regurgitate, so they spit on it. And this is what they are. Their spit is what they are. And in their spit, there's molecules that the plant can recognize. So it will recognize the insect by its spit. And after this recognition, it can do something with regard to its defense. It can produce chemicals that will make it difficult for the insect to chew on the leaf. It can produce volatiles to attract a predator that will eat the insect. So it's a very delicate balance. And we've looked at tomato plants that come from the wild, so from the South America Andes. There's a lot of wild species that are really resilient, only temperature, but also insects. They can, and what they do is they produce specific scent, specific volatiles, and they produce that with their leaf hairs. If I would show you the wild tomato plants, the only thing you have to do is to touch the leaf hairs and smell, and you'll find out that they all have different kinds of smells. What do they do with these smells? Well, they communicate. And do they do that constantly, or can they change the blend? Yes, they can do that. So my interest is to try and find out, how does a plant do that? How does it recognize, and what kind of change happens? What does it need for that? The molecular tools, so the molecules. So that is my interest in figuring out how a plant can do that. And well, as I said to you, we have tried to figure out what is in the spit of an insect and how can a plant recognize that. We figured that out. There's some proteins that are in the spit of an insect that determine whether the plant can recognize it or not. And then I can make it even more complex, because every insect will carry viruses. And these viruses will make the plant sick. So the plant also needs to be able to recognize these viruses. And that is what a plant can do. So this is my enthusiasm, that you can see that a plant can recognize the outside world. So the insect, the viruses, the bacteria, the fungi, and have a response. But that not all varieties have the same kind of response. And if you go into the wild, so we have, let's say, 20 or 30 different wild tomato species, they all respond differently. They all have different solutions. And this is why I always stress, like, you need diversity to come up with solutions that you have not thought about. And this is what I do as research. And what I'm not doing is trying to build this into cultivars. I'm not making a new tomato variety that has all these tools. I do provide my knowledge to the breeding industry. They can read my papers, and then they figure out whether this is possible. And they are smart enough to know that if you would have one line of defense, so you make a plant species that produces a certain volatile to keep away the insect. If you do that, it will work for 1 year. Because then the insect will have learned, oh yeah, this is a nasty smell, but the tomato still tastes good. So 1 year later, it doesn't work anymore. So what you need to do is make sure that if this insect would still come to your tomato plant, that it doesn't survive. So you need to have a second and a third layer of defense. So the diversity of your defense needs to be big. And this is what we are investigating, and our aim is to tell these breeding companies, please, don't do a one-stop solution. It will be interesting for you to sell the seeds, but you will no longer be able to use that part of the defense, because the insects know you have given away the solution. So incorporate 1, 2, or 3 steps, and the puzzle will not be solved. So this is what my research enthusiasm is about, to find out this diversity in solutions that plant species have towards anything that happens.